I used to believe that lost years could never be found, until one loyal dog stopped looking at the road ahead and started staring into a place no map was willing to remember. Ethan Brooks has walked these forest trails more times than he can count since leaving military service, hoping that fresh mountain air might quiet the unanswered questions that have followed him for years. Every weekend he returns to these woods carrying the same worn backpack, the same weathered boots, and the same silence that settled into his life after coming home. Beside him walks Ranger, a mature German shepherd whose calm discipline has never faded despite the passing seasons. Their routine rarely changes. They follow the old logging trail, pause beside a narrow creek, and continue toward a ridge overlooking miles of evergreen forest. It is peaceful, predictable, and almost comforting. Yet on this particular autumn morning, something is different before Ethan even notices it. Ranger slows his pace. His ears rise. His dark eyes fix on a direction that does not belong to their familiar path. The forest is unusually quiet. Even the breeze seems to hesitate among the tall pines, carrying only the scent of damp leaves and cold stone. Ethan watches his companion stop completely beside a weathered cedar tree. The dog does not bark. He does not growl. He simply stares beyond a dense wall of brush toward a place Ethan has never paid attention to before. "What is it, buddy?" Ethan asks softly, expecting the dog to return after a few seconds. Instead, Ranger takes 3 careful steps into the undergrowth, then stops again and looks back over his shoulder. It is not the glance of a dog asking permission. It is the look of a partner asking to be trusted. Ethan feels an unexpected chill despite the mild temperature. He checks the trail behind them. Nothing seems unusual. The sky is clear, sunlight filters through golden leaves, and the mountain remains as quiet as it has always been. Yet something inside him tightens without explanation. Ranger repeats the movement, walking a little farther before stopping once more. His posture is calm but unwavering, as though he is following instructions that only he can hear. Ethan has learned one lesson over the years. A trained German shepherd almost never wastes attention on nothing. Taking a slow breath, he leaves the familiar trail and follows. Thick branches brush against his jacket, while fallen leaves soften each careful step. The deeper they move, the quieter the forest becomes. The sounds of distant birds gradually disappear until only the gentle rhythm of their footsteps remains. After several minutes, Ethan notices something strange. The ground beneath his boots feels smoother than the surrounding forest floor, almost as if many people had once walked here long ago. Moss-covered stones begin appearing in uneven lines. Small openings between the trees seem positioned with surprising order. None of it feels accidental. Ranger continues forward without hesitation. Then he stops one final time at the edge of a steep overlook. Ethan steps beside him and slowly raises his eyes. Hidden below the ridge lies a narrow valley completely concealed by towering cliffs and ancient evergreens, a place impossible to notice from any nearby trail. Mist drifts gently across its floor like quiet waves, while soft morning sunlight reaches only scattered patches of grass. Ethan stares in complete silence. He has studied maps of this region for years. He has trained here, hiked here, remembered fragments of his military service here. Yet he has never seen this valley before. As the cool wind rises from below carrying the faint scent of wet earth and wild cedar, an unexpected feeling settles deep inside him. Not fear, not excitement, but recognition. Somewhere beyond memory, this forgotten place already knows his name. For several long moments, Ethan Brooks remains frozen at the edge of the overlook, unable to explain why the hidden valley below feels strangely familiar. He studies every detail with quiet concentration. Tall evergreens rise like silent guardians around the valley floor, while a narrow stream reflects pale morning light through ribbons of drifting mist. Nothing appears remarkable at first glance, yet the entire landscape carries an invisible sense of order that settles deep inside him. Ranger stands beside him. Without moving, his eyes fixed on the winding descent leading into the valley. There is no uncertainty in the dog. His steady posture suggests he has reached the exact place he intended to find. Ethan slowly kneels beside his longtime companion and gently rests a hand against the thick fur around the dog's neck. Ranger remains perfectly calm, his breathing slow and even, never taking his eyes away from the narrow path disappearing between moss-covered stones. Ethan follows the direction of that silent gaze. A faint trail, almost completely hidden beneath fallen leaves and years of untouched growth, curves carefully down the hillside. It is far too deliberate to have been formed by chance. Someone built this path many years ago, then allowed nature to quietly reclaim it. As they begin their descent, each careful step brings an unfamiliar feeling that Ethan cannot ignore. The air grows cooler with every yard they travel downward. The scent of pine gradually mixes with damp earth, cedar, and fresh water flowing somewhere beyond sight. Sunlight struggles to reach the valley floor, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow that seem almost alive as gentle wind moves through the towering trees. Ranger leads with measured confidence, never pulling ahead too quickly, always pausing long enough for Ethan to follow. It feels less like a hike and more like a guided return to somewhere neither of them should reasonably know. Halfway down the hillside, Ethan notices an old stone marker almost hidden beneath thick green moss. He brushes away the damp surface with his sleeve. No letters remain visible, only faint carved lines worn smooth by decades of rain and snow. He studies the shape for several seconds before an unexpected sensation washes over him. For the briefest instant, he can almost picture another hand touching the same stone years earlier. The image disappears before he can grasp it. Ethan quietly exhales and shakes his head. Memories have played strange tricks on him ever since he left military service. Doctors called them fragmented recall, the natural result of prolonged stress and difficult experiences. He accepted their explanations because there had never been anything solid enough to challenge them. Yet standing here, surrounded by a place he cannot remember visiting but somehow recognizes, those old explanations begin to feel incomplete. Ranger suddenly stops beside the remains of a weathered wooden post leaning at an angle near the trail. The dog lowers his nose only briefly before looking toward Ethan again. There is no excitement, only calm certainty. Ethan steps closer and runs his fingers across the cracked wood. Hidden beneath years of weathering, he discovers shallow grooves cut with deliberate precision. They resemble directional markings rather than random damage. A cold breeze moves quietly through the valley, carrying with it the distant sound of flowing water and something else that almost resembles voices carried by memory instead of wind. Ethan closes his eyes for only a second. A blurred image flashes through his mind. Boots crossing wet ground. A distant radio signal fading into static. Someone calling his name from beyond thick morning fog. His eyes open immediately. The vision disappears as quickly as it arrived, leaving only silence beneath the towering trees. Ranger has already begun walking again, never looking back this time, as though he knows the answers are no longer waiting behind them, but somewhere deeper inside the forgotten valley where every careful step seems determined to awaken another piece of a life Ethan no longer remembers living. The forgotten trail gradually levels out as Ethan Brooks and Ranger step onto the valley floor, where the air feels noticeably cooler and carries the rich scent of damp cedar, fresh moss, and clean spring water. Sunlight barely reaches through the towering evergreens, leaving long ribbons of golden light scattered across the ground like quiet invitations. Ethan pauses for a moment, slowly turning in a full circle. Every direction looks untouched by modern life. There are no signs, no fences, no recent footprints, only the quiet rhythm of nature breathing around them. Yet beneath that silence is another feeling, one he cannot explain. It is as though the valley has been waiting patiently for someone to return. Ranger moves ahead at an unhurried pace, never rushing, never appearing uncertain. His ears remain forward while his nose occasionally lifts into the cool air instead of searching the ground. Ethan notices the difference immediately. This is not ordinary tracking behavior. The dog seems to be navigating through memory rather than scent alone. The realization sends another wave of quiet unease through Ethan, but he continues following without hesitation. The narrow trail slowly widens until it opens into a peaceful meadow surrounded by ancient trees whose enormous trunks suggest they have stood here for generations. Wildflowers bloom between patches of soft grass despite the cool mountain season, and a narrow stream winds quietly across smooth stones polished by countless years of flowing water. Ethan kneels beside the stream, and cups cold water into his hands. As the icy water touches his skin, another brief image flashes across his mind. He sees the reflection of several figures standing nearby, but when he looks up, only Ranger remains beside him. The vision disappears before he can understand it. He wipes the water from his face and quietly exhales. Ranger suddenly changes direction, walking toward a cluster of weathered boulders partially covered with moss and climbing vines. Ethan follows, noticing something unusual hidden among the stones. Several large rocks appear intentionally arranged rather than naturally scattered. Their positions form a subtle line pointing deeper into the valley. He studies the alignment carefully, then looks farther ahead. Another group of stones stands several yards away, continuing the same invisible path. Whoever placed them understood this landscape well enough to leave quiet markers that time itself almost erased. Ethan gently brushes fallen leaves away from one of the largest rocks. Beneath the moss, he discovers shallow carved grooves remarkably similar to the markings they found higher on the hillside. They are worn almost smooth, yet their deliberate shape remains unmistakable. His fingertips trace the faded lines with slow curiosity. Another memory stirs without warning. He hears the soft clicking of radio equipment. Someone nearby says, "Stay." With the markers. The voice is calm, familiar, and gone before he can identify it. Ethan slowly pulls his hand away from the stone, his heartbeat steady but noticeably heavier. Ranger waits several feet ahead, watching him with quiet patience. There is no urgency in the dog's expression, only confidence, as though he already knows every answer waiting farther along the forgotten route. Ethan rises and follows once again. The meadow gradually narrows until the trees begin closing around them. Their branches arch overhead, creating a natural passage where sunlight filters through moving leaves in shifting patterns of gold and green. The peaceful silence remains unbroken except for birdsong carried from somewhere high above the valley. Then Ranger stops one more time. Ahead, partially hidden behind thick ferns and climbing ivy, stands the weathered outline of an old wooden footbridge crossing the narrow stream. Time has faded its color, but its sturdy frame still stands. Ethan stares quietly across the bridge toward the darker forest beyond. Without knowing why, he feels absolutely certain that every forgotten answer he has searched for over the past 4 years is waiting somewhere on the other side. The old wooden footbridge stands in complete silence, its weathered planks softened by decades of rain, mountain snow, and creeping moss. Ethan Brooks studies it carefully before taking a cautious first step. The wood responds with a quiet creak, not weak enough to inspire fear, but old enough to remind him that countless seasons have passed without anyone maintaining it. Ranger crosses first with calm confidence, moving at the same measured pace that has guided them since leaving the familiar trail. Halfway across, the German Shepherd pauses and turns his head toward Ethan. Once again, it is the same steady look that asks for trust instead of permission. Ethan continues across, listening to the gentle sound of the stream flowing beneath the bridge. The water is crystal clear, revealing smooth river stones resting beneath the current. For a brief instant, sunlight reflects across the surface in shifting patterns that stir another fragment of memory. Ethan suddenly sees boots stepping across the same bridge years ago. He hears the distant sound of calm voices exchanging quiet instructions. Someone laughs softly before the image disappears as quickly as it arrived. He blinks, finding himself once again alone with Ranger and the peaceful stream below. They continue into the deeper forest where the trees grow closer together, their towering trunks creating long corridors of filtered light. Every breath carries the rich scent of cedar, pine needles, and damp earth. The valley remains remarkably still. No distant traffic, no aircraft overhead, no signs of modern life interrupt the quiet rhythm surrounding them. Ethan notices that even the birds seem to sing at measured intervals, as though the valley itself follows an invisible order. Ranger slows again near a gentle hillside covered with thick ferns and wild ivy. Instead of continuing forward, he carefully circles a patch of ground several times before stopping beside a large fallen oak tree whose roots have lifted part of the earth. Ethan approaches, kneeling beside the exposed roots. At first he sees nothing unusual. Then his eyes settle on a narrow edge of rusted metal barely visible beneath layers of soil and leaves. His heartbeat quickens, Using only his hands, he carefully brushes away the loose earth. Little by little, the outline of a small weatherproof metal container emerges from beneath the roots. It is heavily worn but remarkably intact, protected by the fallen tree for many years. Ethan lifts it carefully onto a flat stone nearby. Ranger sits quietly beside him without making a sound, watching every movement with calm attention. The container is secured by an old mechanical latch that has stiffened with age. Ethan works patiently until the latch finally releases with a soft metallic click. He slowly raises the lid. Inside rests a neatly folded oilcloth protecting several objects from moisture. Everything has been arranged with deliberate care. The first item Ethan removes is an old military compass whose brass surface has faded with time. Beneath it lies a weathered notebook sealed inside a transparent protective sleeve. Next to the notebook rests a pair of military identification tags wrapped carefully in cloth. Ethan freezes before touching them. His breathing becomes noticeably slower as an overwhelming sense of familiarity settles over him. He has never seen this container before, yet every object inside feels strangely recognizable. Ranger gently lowers his head beside Ethan's shoulder, remaining perfectly still. Ethan finally reaches for the notebook and carefully opens the protective sleeve. The first page contains no official report, no classified markings, only a single handwritten sentence preserved with remarkable clarity despite the passing years. He quietly reads the words to himself. If you ever return, it means the valley remembered before you did. Ethan stares at the page without moving. A cold breeze drifts softly through the trees, carrying the scent of cedar across the clearing as another forgotten memory begins stirring just beyond the edge of conscious thought. Ethan Brooks remains motionless for several seconds, his eyes fixed on the handwritten sentence resting inside the weathered notebook. The words feel less like a message from a stranger and more like a conversation interrupted years ago. He slowly turns the first page, careful not to damage the aging paper. The handwriting is neat, deliberate, and unmistakably familiar, although he cannot immediately understand why. Ranger settles quietly beside him, watching the surrounding forest with calm vigilance while allowing Ethan the silence he needs. The valley itself seems to hold its breath. Even the breeze moves gently through the towering cedars, carrying the earthy scent of pine needles, wet stone, and distant spring water. Ethan begins reading. The opening entries describe a volunteer search and rescue operation conducted deep within these mountains after severe storms isolated several families living beyond the ridges. The reports are written with unusual warmth, focusing less on military procedure and more on protecting frightened civilians, guiding children through dangerous terrain, and using every available resource to reach people before winter weather closed the mountain passes. Ethan feels his pulse slow as each sentence quietly settles into his thoughts. None of these events appear in the official memories he has carried home, yet every page awakens a faint sense of recognition. He carefully turns another page and finds a folded hand-drawn map tucked between the entries. The paper unfolds into a detailed sketch of the hidden valley, showing streams, footbridges, rock markers, and narrow trails that perfectly match the route Ranger has followed since leaving the main forest path. Small handwritten notes identify safe crossings, freshwater springs, and observation points overlooking the surrounding cliffs. Ethan studies the map in complete silence. Every location they have already visited has been marked with remarkable precision. Near the center of the valley, a small circle surrounds a handwritten phrase that immediately captures his attention. Meeting point after sunrise. His breathing grows noticeably heavier. Ranger rises quietly and walks a few steps toward the direction indicated on the map before stopping once again. The dog does not appear excited. Instead, he waits patiently, as though he has expected this moment all along. Ethan returns his attention to the notebook. Several pages later, he discovers a carefully preserved photograph tucked inside a protective sleeve. The colors have faded with time, but the image remains clear enough to recognize a small group of smiling people standing near a mountain cabin. Children wrapped in oversized jackets stand beside older volunteers, while several military personnel kneel nearby. Ethan studies every face with growing concentration. Then his eyes stop. Near the edge of the photograph, partly hidden behind another volunteer, stands a younger version of himself. He is smiling in a way Ethan has not seen in his own reflection for many years. Beside him sits a younger German shepherd whose alert posture and intelligent expression bear an unmistakable resemblance to Ranger. Ethan gently lowers the photograph into his lap, unable to speak. A quiet warmth begins replacing the uncertainty that has followed him for so long. He realizes that the empty years inside his memory may never have been truly empty. They were simply waiting for something strong enough to guide him back. Ranger steps closer and rests his head lightly against Ethan's shoulder. Ethan reaches down and gently scratches behind the dog's ears without taking his eyes from the faded photograph. The peaceful silence surrounding the valley suddenly feels different. It is no longer the silence of forgotten places. It is the silence of memories patiently waiting until the heart was finally ready to remember. As Ethan carefully folds the map and closes the notebook, his eyes return to the small circle labeled Meeting Point After Sunrise. He looks toward the deeper valley where the narrow trail disappears between towering evergreens, and for the first time since arriving, he feels certain that every unanswered question still waiting inside him has a destination. Ethan Brooks carefully places the photograph, the folded map, and the weathered notebook back onto the flat stone beside him before lifting his eyes toward the narrow trail disappearing between towering evergreens. The words "Meeting Point After Sunrise" remain fixed in his mind, echoing with quiet persistence. He studies the hand-drawn map once more, comparing the surrounding landmarks to the valley before him. The stream curves exactly where the sketch suggests. The line of moss-covered stones matches the markings they followed. Even the old wooden footbridge appears in precisely the same location. Nothing about the map feels symbolic or uncertain. It was created by someone who knew this valley intimately. Ranger rises without being called. He walks to the edge of the clearing and pauses beside another weathered stone marker almost hidden beneath ferns. His posture is calm, neither impatient nor hesitant. Ethan folds the map carefully and slips it into his jacket before picking up the old compass from the metal container. Although the brass casing has dulled with age, the compass needle settles almost immediately. He notices something unusual. The indicated direction does not perfectly match true north. Instead, it aligns almost exactly with the route Ranger has chosen since entering the valley. Ethan turns the compass slightly, expecting the needle to correct itself, but it returns to the same orientation every time. He smiles faintly, not because he believes the compass is malfunctioning, but because another impossible detail has quietly become part of a growing pattern. Together they continue deeper into the valley. The forest changes almost imperceptibly. Ancient cedar trees become taller, their trunks wider than Ethan can reach with both arms. Thick carpets of emerald moss soften every footstep, while shafts of warm sunlight slip through narrow openings high above, painting slow-moving patterns across the forest floor. The peaceful silence no longer feels empty. It feels protective, as though the valley itself has chosen to preserve every memory entrusted to it. Ranger maintains his steady pace, occasionally stopping only long enough to glance toward Ethan before continuing forward. Several hundred yards later, they arrive at a small, open meadow surrounded by granite outcrops. Wildflowers bloom quietly around the edges despite the cool mountain air. At the center of the meadow stands a simple wooden bench, weathered but still standing, facing the rising eastern ridge. Ethan slowly approaches, surprised that something so ordinary could remain untouched for so many years. The wood has faded to a pale gray, yet careful craftsmanship is still visible beneath the weathering. He brushes away fallen pine needles from the seat and notices a small brass plaque fastened beneath the front edge. Time has softened the engraving, but the words remain readable. Hope arrives before memory. Ethan quietly repeats the sentence under his breath. The phrase stirs something deep inside him. Another fragment surfaces without warning. He remembers sitting on this very bench while the first light of morning spread across the valley. Around him stood volunteers, local families, and fellow service members sharing warm coffee after long days of guiding stranded residents through safe mountain routes. Laughter drifted through the crisp air. Children chased one another across the grass while Ranger, much younger then, rested proudly beside him. The memory lasts longer than the previous ones. It carries warmth instead of confusion. Ethan slowly sits on the bench exactly where the memory placed him. Ranger lies peacefully at his feet, resting his head across Ethan's boot. The valley remains beautifully quiet, but now the silence feels welcoming instead of mysterious. Ethan realizes that every place Ranger has led him has awakened not forgotten facts alone, but forgotten feelings. The missing years were never truly erased. They had simply been separated from the emotions that gave them meaning. As the first rays of afternoon sunlight spread across the meadow, Ethan looks toward the eastern ridge marked on the map. Somewhere beyond those trees waits the place identified only as the meeting point, and with every steady breath, he feels himself drawing closer not only to the final answer, but to the man he once was before memory quietly lost its way. Leaving the quiet meadow behind, Ethan Brooks and Ranger continue toward the eastern ridge marked on the faded map. The narrow trail begins climbing steadily, weaving between towering cedar trees whose branches form a high canopy above them. The afternoon sun filters through countless layers of evergreen needles, casting shifting bands of light across the forest floor. Every step feels strangely familiar to Ethan now. He no longer walks with the uncertainty that followed him into the hidden valley. Instead, each landmark seems to awaken another quiet piece of recognition. Ranger leads at the same measured pace, never hurrying, never hesitating, as though every turn has already been remembered long before today. The higher they climb, the cooler the mountain air becomes. A gentle breeze carries the scent of wild sage, pine resin, and distant waterfalls echoing somewhere beyond the cliffs. Ethan reaches into his jacket and unfolds the hand-drawn map once again. The line leading toward the meeting point follows the exact slope they are climbing. Small handwritten notes identify overlooks, resting places, and safe routes around steep rock formations. Whoever created the map expected someone to return one day. That thought stays with Ethan as they continue upward. Ranger suddenly slows near an enormous granite outcrop rising above the surrounding forest. Without making a sound, he walks around its edge and disappears briefly behind the stone. Ethan follows and discovers a narrow natural staircase carved into the mountainside. Moss softens each weathered step, but careful craftsmanship is still visible beneath decades of gentle erosion. He places one hand against the cool stone wall while climbing. The surface feels smooth beneath his fingertips, worn not by weather alone, but by countless hands passing through long ago. Halfway to the top, another memory quietly surfaces. Ethan remembers carrying supplies alongside volunteers climbing these same stone steps at sunrise. Someone behind him joked that the climb would always feel longer on the way up than on the way down. Laughter echoed through the trees. The memory fades slowly this time, leaving behind warmth instead of confusion. When they reach the summit, Ethan stops without speaking. Before him stretches a breathtaking overlook high above the hidden valley. From this elevation, the entire landscape reveals itself with astonishing clarity. The winding stream forms a graceful curve through the valley floor. The meadow, wooden footbridge, stone markers, and ancient cedar groves align in a pattern impossible to recognize from below. Ethan slowly turns in place, following the lines across the landscape. Every landmark connects naturally to the next, creating a carefully organized network rather than isolated locations. The realization settles quietly inside him. This valley was never simply a place hidden by mountains. It was intentionally designed to guide people safely through difficult terrain. Ranger walks to the edge of the overlook and sits beside a weathered observation marker built from stacked stones. His ears remain forward as he gazes across the valley with calm certainty. Ethan kneels beside him and studies the horizon. Far across the opposite ridge, he notices another small stone marker positioned almost perfectly in line with the one beside them. Then another farther away. The entire valley begins revealing its silent geometry. Safe routes, observation points, supply locations, and gathering places all connect through natural landmarks that only become visible from above. Ethan unfolds the map beside the overlook and gently places it against the stone marker. Every line on the page mirrors the landscape before his eyes with remarkable precision. Suddenly, another memory returns in full clarity. He remembers standing at this exact overlook years earlier while local volunteers gathered around him. Together, they traced routes across the valley, planning how to guide isolated families through safe passages before winter storms arrived. Nobody had spoken about heroics or recognition. They simply wanted everyone to reach home safely. Ethan slowly closes his eyes, overcome not by sadness but by profound gratitude. When he opens them again, the valley no longer feels mysterious. It feels deeply familiar. Ranger quietly rises and turns toward a final trail leading beyond the overlook. Ethan folds the map with careful hands and follows without hesitation, knowing that somewhere beyond the next ridge waits the last piece of the story that has patiently followed them both through every forgotten season. Ethan Brooks follows Ranger beyond the overlook, where the narrow trail descends gently along the eastern side of the ridge before disappearing beneath a canopy of ancient cedar branches. The late afternoon light grows warmer, painting the forest with soft shades of amber and gold while long shadows stretch quietly across the moss-covered ground. Every sound seems clearer now. The steady flow of the distant stream, the whisper of wind moving through evergreen needles, and the quiet rhythm of their footsteps blend into a peaceful harmony that feels strangely familiar. Ethan no longer questions why he trusts the path ahead. Somewhere along the climb, uncertainty quietly gave way to confidence. Ranger continues leading with calm determination, occasionally slowing only long enough to ensure Ethan remains close behind. After several hundred yards, the trees begin to thin, revealing another secluded clearing unlike any they have passed before. At its center stands the weathered foundation of a small mountain cabin. Time has reclaimed most of the structure. Only portions of the stone chimney, several wooden support beams, and the outline of the original porch remain standing beneath climbing vines and soft green moss. Ethan steps carefully into the clearing, feeling an unexpected warmth settle over him. The place is silent, yet it carries the unmistakable feeling of having once been filled with life. Ranger walks directly to the remains of the front doorway and quietly sits, facing the open foundation without moving. Ethan studies the cabin ruins before slowly approaching. Beneath layers of fallen leaves he notices scattered objects preserved by the dry mountain air. An old enamel coffee cup rests near the stone fireplace. A rusted lantern hangs from a wooden beam that somehow survived the passing years. Nearby, a child's small carved wooden bird lies partially hidden beneath pine needles. Ethan gently lifts it into his hand. The smooth wood feels familiar beneath his fingertips. As he turns the tiny carving over, another memory returns with remarkable clarity. He remembers sitting outside this very cabin while children gathered around a picnic table, laughing as they painted wooden animals during a community gathering after the rescue operation had ended. One little girl proudly handed him the carved bird, insisting he keep it because, in her words, birds always remember the way home. Ethan closes his eyes as the memory settles gently into place. This time it does not vanish. It remains steady, connected to countless smaller moments that had once seemed forever beyond reach. He slowly walks inside the outline of the old cabin, where sunlight pours through the missing roof and illuminates the stone fireplace. Resting on the wide mantel is a small glass jar sealed with a cork. Inside are dozens of neatly folded slips of paper. Ethan carefully removes the cork and unfolds the first note. It contains only a single sentence written in careful handwriting. "Thank you for helping my grandmother find the safe trail." Another reads, "We made it home before the snow because you stayed one more day." Another simply says, "You remembered us even when we were strangers." Ethan reads quietly, one message after another. None mention medals, missions, or recognition. Every note speaks only of kindness, patience, and ordinary moments that quietly changed lives. Tears gather in his eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that the years missing from his memory had never been empty. They had been filled with simple acts of compassion too humble to seek attention, yet powerful enough to remain alive in the hearts of those who were helped. Ranger walks into the cabin and rests beside the fireplace, looking toward Ethan with calm eyes that seem to understand long before words ever could. Ethan carefully places every handwritten note back inside the jar and sets it gently upon the mantel once more. As the warm mountain light fills the quiet cabin, he realizes the hidden valley has not been asking him to recover forgotten history. It has been guiding him toward the forgotten purpose that once gave those years their deepest meaning. And somewhere beyond this peaceful place, one final memory still waits to complete the journey. The peaceful silence inside the old mountain cabin lingers long after Ethan Brooks carefully places the final handwritten note back into the glass jar. He stands quietly before the weathered stone fireplace, while warm afternoon light pours through the missing roof, illuminating tiny dust particles drifting through the still air. Ranger rises slowly and walks toward the back of the cabin, where one section of the original wall has partially collapsed beneath years of vines and creeping moss. The German Shepherd stops beside a large flat stone embedded in the floor, then gently places one paw against its edge before looking back at Ethan. There is no urgency in his eyes, only calm certainty. Ethan steps closer and kneels beside the stone. Its surface appears ordinary until he notices faint tool marks around the edges. Someone intentionally shaped and positioned it many years ago. Using both hands, he carefully clears away loose leaves, soil, and small patches of moss. Gradually, a narrow metal ring becomes visible, nearly hidden beneath the weathered surface. Ethan grips the ring and slowly lifts. The stone rises with surprising ease, revealing a shallow compartment protected from moisture beneath the cabin floor. Inside rests a tightly sealed canvas pouch. The fabric has faded with age but remains remarkably well preserved. Ranger quietly sits beside Ethan, watching without making a sound. Ethan opens the pouch carefully. Inside he finds several folded documents, a bundle of handwritten letters tied together with faded blue string, and a single leather journal whose cover bears no official markings. He opens the journal slowly. The first page contains only a date followed by a sentence written in familiar handwriting. Today we guided every family safely through the valley before the storm arrived. Ethan feels his breathing slow as another memory gently unfolds within him. He remembers standing beneath gray autumn skies while volunteers, local residents, and service members worked side by side preparing supplies, marking safe trails, and carrying food across the valley before heavy snowfall closed every mountain pass. Nobody asked who deserved credit. Everyone simply helped wherever they were needed. Ethan continues reading. Each journal entry describes ordinary acts of kindness rather than extraordinary accomplishments. One page records how neighbors opened their homes to strangers during severe weather. Another describes children collecting firewood together while older residents prepared warm meals for exhausted volunteers. Another tells the story of Ranger guiding frightened hikers across flooded ground after darkness had fallen. Every page quietly confirms the same truth. The mission had never been about recognition. It had always been about people choosing compassion before convenience. Ethan carefully unties the blue string around the bundle of letters. The envelopes contain handwritten messages sent months and even years after the rescue effort ended. Families describe graduations, new homes, growing children, and peaceful lives that became possible because someone refused to give up searching for safe paths through the mountains. One letter contains a simple photograph of smiling grandchildren standing beside a wooden sign reading Hope Trail. Ethan studies the image with quiet amazement. The safe routes planned inside this hidden valley had continued, helping people long after everyone else believed the work had ended. The realization settles deeply within him. The missing years were never lost because they lacked importance. They disappeared because the memories belonged to moments of quiet service instead of dramatic headlines. Ranger gently rests his head against Ethan's arm, and Ethan smiles through eyes filled with gratitude. He understands now why every recovered memory carries warmth instead of regret. They are reminders that the greatest chapters of a life are often written without applause. Ethan carefully returns every letter and document to the canvas pouch before closing the hidden compartment exactly as he found it. As he stands once more inside the peaceful cabin, golden evening light begins stretching across the valley beyond the doorway. Somewhere ahead, one final destination still waits, not to reveal another secret, but to show him why Ranger never stopped believing that this forgotten place would eventually lead his oldest friend all the way back to himself. As the last rays of afternoon sunlight settle across the old cabin, Ethan Brooks takes one final look around the quiet room before stepping outside with Ranger at his side. The valley feels different now. It no longer carries the weight of unanswered questions. Instead, every breeze through the cedar branches seems to whisper with quiet familiarity, as though the land itself recognizes that another forgotten chapter has found its rightful place. Ranger pauses at the edge of the clearing, lifts his head into the cool mountain air, and turns toward a narrow trail climbing gently along the western hillside. Ethan reaches into his jacket and unfolds the weathered map once more. Near the upper corner, almost hidden beneath a fold in the paper, he notices a handwritten note he had overlooked before. It simply reads, "Final gathering place." There is no symbol beside the words, only a small arrow pointing toward the highest ridge overlooking the valley. Ethan carefully folds the map again and slips it into his pocket. Without speaking, he follows Ranger up the winding trail. The climb is steady but peaceful. Ancient pines sway gently overhead while evening sunlight filters through their branches, painting warm amber patterns across the rocky ground. Every few yards, another familiar sensation rises inside him. He remembers carrying boxes of medical supplies along this very hillside. He remembers neighbors greeting one another with relieved smiles after difficult days. He remembers children waving from distant meadows while Ranger ran happily ahead, guiding everyone along the safest route. None of the memories arrive with confusion anymore. They flow naturally into one another, forming a complete story where scattered fragments once existed. Ranger eventually stops beside a large white oak standing alone near the summit. Beyond the tree, the forest opens onto a broad overlook facing the entire hidden valley below. Ethan slowly steps forward, and his breath catches as he sees a simple circle of smooth stone benches arranged around a weathered flagpole. The flag itself is gone, but the carefully crafted gathering place remains remarkably well preserved. Moss softens the edges of each stone seat, and wildflowers bloom naturally between them. It is quiet, beautiful, and deeply welcoming. Ethan walks into the center of the circle, turning slowly as another memory returns with perfect clarity. He remembers standing here surrounded by volunteers, local families, and fellow service members on the morning after the rescue effort ended. There had been no formal ceremony, no speeches, and no reporters. Instead, people simply shared breakfast together while watching the sunrise spread across the valley. Someone thanked every volunteer by name. Children handed small bouquets of mountain flowers to those who had helped guide them safely through the storms. Ranger rested proudly beside Ethan while everyone laughed, embraced, and quietly celebrated the simple miracle of returning home together. Ethan opens his eyes, and for a brief moment the memory feels so vivid that the peaceful voices almost seem to drift across the evening breeze. He smiles gently, no longer trying to separate memory from the present. Both belong here. Ranger walks toward the old flagpole and sits beside its weathered base. Ethan notices a small bronze plaque secured to the stone foundation beneath it. He kneels to brush away years of moss until the inscription becomes readable. It says, "The strongest paths are the ones people build together." Ethan quietly repeats the words, allowing them to settle deep within his heart. He finally understands why this place never disappeared completely. The hidden valley had preserved more than memories. It had preserved proof that ordinary kindness can outlast time itself. As golden light slowly fades behind the distant mountains, Ethan rests one hand gently on Ranger's shoulder. Together they look across the valley where every trail, every bridge, every marker, and every quiet act of compassion has become part of one complete story. Somewhere inside that peaceful view, Ethan realizes there is only one final truth left waiting to be understood before he can leave this remarkable place with a heart that is finally whole. The evening air grows cooler as Ethan Brooks and Ranger remain quietly beside the weathered flagpole overlooking the hidden valley. The last light of the sun stretches across the mountains, turning the streams below into ribbons of gold. Ethan breathes deeply, allowing the peaceful silence to settle around him. For the first time in many years, the quiet inside his heart matches the quiet surrounding the valley. Ranger slowly rises and walks toward the far edge of the overlook where a narrow stone path curves gently through a grove of old cedar trees. Ethan follows without hesitation. The path is short, ending at a single wooden structure standing beneath the tallest tree on the ridge. It is not a cabin or a lookout tower. It is a simple display shelter built to protect something important from rain and snow. Time has faded the wood to a soft silver color, but careful craftsmanship is still visible in every beam. Ranger stops beside the entrance and calmly sits. Ethan steps inside. Resting on a sturdy wooden table beneath the shelter is a large leather-bound guest book sealed inside a glass case. Beside it lies an old brass key attached to a small wooden tag. The handwritten label simply says, "For the one who comes back." Ethan gently opens the glass cover and lifts the guest book with both hands. The leather is smooth from years of careful use. As he opens the first pages, he discovers hundreds of handwritten entries collected over many seasons. Families describe peaceful reunions after difficult winters. Volunteers write about friendships that lasted a lifetime. Children who once crossed the valley safely have returned years later as adults, bringing their own sons and daughters to the same mountain trails. Every message shares the same quiet theme: gratitude, not for extraordinary miracles, but for ordinary people who chose kindness when kindness mattered most. Ethan slowly turns another page. Near the center of the book, he suddenly recognizes his own handwriting. His heart stops for a brief moment. The date was written exactly 4 years before the memories became scattered inside his mind. He carefully reads the words aloud in a whisper. "If one day I forget this place, I hope someone who remembers will guide me back, because no life should lose the memories that taught it how to love." Ethan closes his eyes. The final missing piece quietly falls into place. He had not forgotten because the years lacked meaning. He had forgotten because, after returning home, life moved forward while these deeply personal memories remained gently buried beneath the weight of time. Yet before leaving the valley all those years ago, he had somehow sensed that memory could fade. So he left himself a promise, trusting that one day the right guide would return him here. Ethan lowers the book slowly, his eyes filled with peaceful understanding. He looks down at Ranger, who watches him with the same calm expression that first led him away from the familiar trail. Ethan smiles warmly and kneels beside his faithful companion. "You remembered for both of us," he says softly, gently resting his forehead against the German shepherd's. Ranger closes his eyes for a quiet moment, remaining perfectly still as the cool evening breeze moves through the cedar branches overhead. Ethan realizes that throughout every uncertain season, every unanswered question, and every silent walk through the forest, his loyal friend had been patiently carrying a map that existed not on paper, but within unwavering devotion. Together they step back outside the shelter. The first evening stars begin appearing above the valley while gentle mountain winds carry the familiar scent of cedar and fresh water across the ridge. Ethan looks once more toward the peaceful landscape below. Nothing about the valley has changed. Only the man standing above it has finally become whole again, and with one final destination still waiting before dawn, he knows the journey has become less about recovering the past and more about carrying its quiet light into every tomorrow that still lies ahead. Morning arrives quietly over the hidden valley, wrapping the mountains in a gentle veil of silver mist while the first rays of sunlight slowly awaken the towering cedars. Ethan Brooks stands outside the small shelter beside Ranger, breathing in the cool mountain air with a sense of peace he has not felt in many years. The weight that once followed every unanswered question has quietly disappeared, replaced by a calm understanding that no explanation from a doctor or official report could ever have provided. Ranger stretches comfortably before beginning to walk back toward the overlook, not with the determined purpose that guided every step of the previous day, but with the relaxed confidence of a companion who knows the journey has reached its destination. Ethan follows beside him instead of behind him now. Their footsteps fall naturally into the same rhythm. When they arrive once more at the stone circle overlooking the valley, the entire landscape glows beneath the golden light of sunrise. Thin ribbons of mist drift above the winding stream. Wildflowers shimmer with tiny drops of morning dew, and distant birds greet the new day with gentle songs carried across the mountains. Ethan quietly sits on one of the weathered stone benches, allowing himself to simply watch the valley breathe. He no longer searches for hidden meanings within every landmark because every important answer has already found him. Ranger settles beside his feet, resting comfortably against his leg. Ethan gently places one hand upon the dog's broad shoulders and smiles. "Thank you," he whispers softly. The words are simple, yet they carry years of gratitude. not only for leading him through forgotten trails, but for never giving up on the person Ethan had almost forgotten himself. The morning breeze moves gently through the old flagpole, producing a faint wooden hum that blends naturally with the sounds of the waking forest. Ethan closes his eyes for a brief moment. Instead of fragmented images, complete memories now pass peacefully through his mind. He remembers neighbors embracing after reaching safety. He remembers volunteers sharing warm coffee beneath cold autumn skies. He remembers children laughing while Ranger patiently accepted grateful hugs from tiny hands. Most of all, he remembers the feeling that had quietly connected every moment together. Hope, not the loud kind that demands attention, but the quiet kind that grows every time one person chooses to help another without expecting anything in return. Ethan opens his eyes again and notices something he had overlooked the evening before. Around the outer edge of the stone gathering circle, dozens of small cedar saplings have taken root naturally over the passing years. They now surround the overlook like a living promise, each young tree growing from seeds carried by the older forest that protected this valley for generations. Ethan smiles as another realization gently settles inside him. Memories are much like forests. They continue growing even when unseen, quietly waiting for the right season to reveal their strength. He reaches into his backpack and removes the small carved wooden bird he discovered inside the old cabin. Carefully, he places it upon one of the stone benches facing the sunrise. It feels right to leave it where it belongs, not as something abandoned, but as a quiet reminder for whoever may one day find this peaceful place again. Ranger rises and gently nudges Ethan's hand with his nose. Together they begin the walk toward the familiar trail leading out of the valley. This time neither of them looks back immediately. There is no sadness in leaving because Ethan understands that nothing truly meaningful remains behind. The hidden valley has already given him everything it was patiently preserving. As they reach the first bend in the trail, Ethan pauses for one final glance across the peaceful mountains. The sunlight now fills every corner of the valley, revealing not a forgotten place, but a living reminder that kindness, loyalty, and quiet service never disappear. They simply wait, like faithful friends, until someone is ready to remember them once again. Several weeks pass before Ethan Brooks returns to the mountains, but this time the journey feels completely different. The familiar trail welcomes him like an old friend instead of an unanswered question. Ranger walks beside him with the same calm confidence, though there is no longer any need to lead the way. They move together as equals, sharing each quiet step beneath the towering pines while crisp mountain air carries the comforting scent of cedar, fresh earth, and distant streams. Autumn has begun giving way to early winter, painting the highest ridges with a gentle dusting of snow while golden leaves still shimmer across the lower forests. Ethan notices details he once hurried past without seeing. Sunlight reflecting through frost-covered branches. The steady rhythm of a woodpecker somewhere beyond the trees. Tiny animal tracks crossing soft patches of earth after the morning dew. Everything feels wonderfully ordinary, yet every ordinary moment now carries extraordinary meaning. When they finally reach the overlook above the hidden valley, Ethan quietly removes his backpack and sits upon the same weathered stone bench where he had watched the sunrise before leaving. Ranger settles beside him, resting peacefully against his leg. Neither of them speaks through movement because nothing more needs explaining. The valley below continues exactly as it always has. The winding stream still catches the afternoon light. The cedar forest still protects every quiet trail. The old gathering place still waits patiently among the hills, asking for nothing except remembrance. Ethan reaches into his backpack and removes a new leather journal. He opens the first page and begins writing slowly. He does not record military reports or forgotten timelines. Instead, he writes the names of every ordinary kindness he now remembers. The warm coffee shared with strangers after cold mornings. The laughter of children painting small wooden birds. The volunteers who carried supplies without asking for recognition. The neighbors who opened their homes before opening their own worries. The faithful German shepherd who never stopped believing that one day memory would find its way home. Each sentence feels lighter than the last. By the time he closes the journal, he realizes he is no longer writing to preserve the past. He is writing so future days will never lose sight of what truly matters. Ranger gently lifts his head as a soft breeze moves across the overlook. Ethan smiles and scratches behind the dog's ears exactly as he has done countless times before. "We found it," he says quietly. "Not the valley. Not the memories. We found the reason they were worth remembering." Ranger's tail brushes softly across the fallen leaves, and for a brief moment the peaceful silence answers more completely than words ever could. As the afternoon sun slowly begins sinking behind the distant mountains, Ethan stands and shoulders his backpack. He takes one final look across the valley, but there is no feeling of farewell. Places built upon kindness are never truly left behind. They continue living inside every choice shaped by what was learned there. Together, Ethan and Ranger begin the gentle walk back toward the familiar forest trail. Their shadows stretch long across the path before them, side by side, moving with quiet purpose toward whatever tomorrow may hold. Behind them, the hidden valley rests peacefully beneath the fading light, unchanged, patient, and full of grace. Ahead of them lies an ordinary road, yet Ethan now understands that ordinary roads often lead to the greatest miracles when walked with gratitude, loyalty, and hope. As the first evening stars quietly appear above the mountain ridges, one simple truth settles forever into his heart. Some people spend their lives searching for extraordinary places. Others are fortunate enough to discover that the greatest miracle was never hidden inside a valley at all. It was quietly waiting inside a faithful heart that refused to stop leading someone home.